had a Greek father. Now, what that means in those days was that he was a Gentile, was not really a believer. And it appears that Eunice's mother, Lois, was a Christian, a faithful lady, and her daughter then, Lois, grew up being faithful, but evidently married outside the faith. So what happened was, and I don't know if Timothy's father was absent, it appears that his father was absent in his upbringing. And so it looks like Grandma Eunice and Mother Lois, Grandmother Lois and Mother Eunice, it looks like the two of them were the ones that brought Timothy up, teaching him faith. And that's encouraging and interesting to note. In 1 Corinthians 7, keep your finger here, because we're gonna come back to this. 1 Corinthians 7, the Bible says this, verse 13, the woman which hath an husband that believeth not, and if he be pleased to dwell with her, let her not leave him. For the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. Else were your children unclean, but now are they holy. That's an interesting conversation about the children and how they respond in a home where the father is not saved and the mother is. Interesting. Or the mother is not saved and the father is. It's an interesting thing there. And the indication here by that verse, those passages of Scripture, without getting into the deep knots of all of that, because I don't want to waste time on this, because I got a point I want to get to. But the indication, coupled with 2 Timothy, is that one parent that loves God can raise children that love God, even if the other parent doesn't. And that's interesting and important and encouraging. Okay? So remember that while we're looking at these verses. Let's go to 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 14. But continue thou in the things which thou hast learned and hast been assured of, knowing of whom thou hast learned them, and that from a child thou hast known the Holy Scriptures, which are able to make thee wise unto salvation. Look what it says in through faith which is in Christ Jesus. All Scripture, verse 16, is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be perfect, thoroughly furnished unto all good works. So here's what happened. This mother and daughter combination taught this young Timothy the Scriptures, taught him so well the Scriptures that when he grew up, he became a right-hand man to Paul. Paul was able to ordain him as an elder, and Timothy became one of the youngest pastors of that generation. Timothy's leadership in the church was questioned because of his youth. At one point, Paul says, "Let no man despise thy youth, but be thou an example of the believers." Because he was so young, he said, be careful. Don't let people despise the fact that you're so young. Be careful how you handle yourself and be an example and be a leader. And Timothy was. Became an effective young man. The early church gives us accounts of that. The Roman Catholics claim this: give me your child until he's 7, and he will be ours until he dies. Have you ever heard that before? John Wesley used to say, you need to get your child's spirit under control before he's 2, or he'll break yours before he's 20. That's interesting, isn't it? How young the children need to be taught. I'm going to show you a few things. Galatians chapter 4, we're going to explore this, kind of unpack it just a little bit. I have several verses to take you to just to kind of help you understand what we're driving at here. Galatians 4 says this in verse 1, "Now I say that the heir, as long as he's a child, differeth nothing from a servant, though he be Lord of all, but is under tutors and governors until the time appointed of the father. I think it's important for us to understand that children are children. Children need to be taught. They need to be taught how to work. They need the work ethic. I'm thinking, I know of this one family I watched grow up, and here's what happened. The mother was the servant in the house, and she had 2 girls, and she said, I'm not going to make my girls wash dishes because I had to be a slave in my house when I was a kid. I'm not going to let them be slaves in our house. And so she spoiled them rotten, did not give them chores, did not let them pull their weight in the house. And to be sure, you moms know how this is. If you tell your daughter, go do this a certain way, and she's not going to do it the way you would do it, right? And so it's more work for you to let your kid do it than do it yourself. How many moms know what I'm talking about? Here's the thing, though. You're the mom for a reason, right? So your actual work is to teach them how to do things, not to do it yourself. Do this, it'll help us all. It's true, isn't it? So, and in this case, what I'm describing, I really don't want to bash this family, but I've watched those girls grow into adulthood, and I don't mean to be obnoxious or nasty or mean or rude, but those 2 girls are 2 of the most obnoxious jerks I've ever met in my life. I've known them since they were born. And I watched their mom completely destroy them, never giving them any responsibility. They grew up brats, and now they're in their middle 20s, and they're still brats. And it's really ugly when they're in their middle 20s. And I could tell you more about it. It would shock you, but I'm online, and I really don't want to do that. I don't want to reveal exactly who I'm talking about. But the truth is that I've seen this happen. I've seen where parents do not give the kids chores. They don't teach them how to work, and the kids grow up with this entitlement. And in our culture, that seems to be more and more and more and more entitlement. I've had the opportunity. We've had teenagers to our house and so on, and you can tell the ones with good training and the ones without. If we're gonna take them, sometimes on Wednesday night they'll come to our house or whatever, and if we'll take them to a restaurant. Oh, I don't want to go to that restaurant. Who's paying? You or me? Who's paying? Well, I want all these things, and I'm going to get all of this stuff, and I'm going to throw 2/3 of it away because I don't like this and I don't like that. And let's go to another restaurant now, and let's get a snack after this. Like, who's paying for all this? Well, we want to go to this fancy restaurant, and we want the biggest whatever, and you just pay for it. Kids growing up that way. Entitled. Are you guys hearing what I'm saying? If you're older and you got grandkids, just keep this in mind. If you see that bratty attitude, sit on it. It doesn't play well when they're adults. Thankfulness, gratefulness is something that needs to be taught. But anyway, this Galatians 4, he talks about being under tutors and governors until the time appointed of the Father. This is a place where they've got to learn servanthood. They've got to learn that. And they've got to learn how to be giving, and they've got to learn how to submit. And submission is a painful process. Learning how to submit to authority is a painful process. Anybody ever notice that? It's not easy. but it's how you get a job and keep a job. Right? It's how you get a job and keep a job. You learn how to submit when things aren't going exactly the way you think they ought to go. That's how you stay married. Learning how to develop relationships that when things are not going exactly the way you think they ought to go. You know, and I know there's other circumstances. I'm not just saying that. I'm not meaning to paint with a broad brush, but that's what I'm doing right now. It's kind of a broad, we're not talking about specific things. I want you to go back to Deuteronomy 6 now. Let's talk about another thing, another way to teach children. This is important, I think. Deuteronomy chapter 6. I've been in homes where every night, for an hour every night, the parents will have devotions with their kids. And the kids will gather around. And when I grew up, my dad did for us something you've heard me talk about before, but every night before we went to bed, we read out of the book of Revelation. And that did something in my brain that put Revelation deep in my brain, and I'm thankful for that. But I know a lot of families where they will spend all these hours, maybe in the morning or at night, doing these little sermonette message things, and I've never really seen that produce consistently. Depending on, here's what I've seen produce. Deuteronomy 6. Verse 6. And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children. Watch this now. Here's what works. And shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, when thou walkest by the way, when thou liest down, when thou risest up. Thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thine hand. They shall be frontlets between thine eyes, and thou shalt write them upon the posts of thy house and on thy gates. What's he talking about? He's talking about making the Bible part of the fabric of your life, not making it an hour devotion period. Does that make sense? Weaving it into the fabric. So when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up, everything about what you're doing ought to be permeated with the Bible. This week I had a class, my algebra class, we were talking about Euclid, created mathematics, and it gave me an opportunity to stop and talk to the kids about how this guy, this mathematician, had developed this system of mathematics hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and we still follow his geometric designs. And I told them how that I'm a preacher, so it's easy for me to go into sermon mode in algebra class. I can preach a sermon off of a line in an algebra book. I'm just telling you. We'll get right into the Bible. It's easy to do. But, yeah, some of them, they like it better when I get off on it. But the thing is, I told them how that historically, about every 40 years in America, we have some form of awakening. Have you guys noticed that? You go back about every 40 years. How many of you guys remember the moral majority? Anybody? You remember it? How many of you? Let me see your hand if you remember moral majority. Does the name Jerry Falwell ring a bell with anybody? Okay? Jerry Falwell started this organization called the Moral Majority. His idea was that there's more people in America that were moral than people that were not. And he said they're silent. This was back in the 70s. Well, in the 70s, we were all buying little tiny cars because gas prices were going through the roof. I mean, they were almost $1 a gallon. So we were buying Pintos and anybody remember all those days? Datsuns and all those little tiny cars because we weren't trying to save the environment. We were trying to save the grocery bill. Everybody was buying those little tiny cars, those little rabbits, and they were just going, those little cars were going all over the place because we were trying to save money because gas was getting so expensive. Well, our nation was in decline. We'd come out of the 60s movement. God had been kicked out of the public school because of Madeline Murray O'Hare and her son Bill Murray. That whole thing where they used to have prayer in the classrooms in the 60s, the prayer was taken out of the classrooms. They were not allowed to do it anymore, and they began to secularize the public school completely. And this was happening, and then we had these kids having these huge protests. They were burning down libraries. Anybody remember those things? Kent State University. You remember, anybody? Some of you do. I'm the youngest of 7. My father served in World War II, so I'm like at the tail end of remembering all that. It was big in our family because I was the youngest and I was watching it all happen. But my brother was in Vietnam, went to Vietnam, and my sister's boyfriend was killed in Vietnam. Our song leader from our church was with the Black Knights. He was in Vietnam. And all of these soldiers, we went to Washington, D.C. I remember we took our choir to Washington, D.C., and we sang on the Capitol steps, God Bless Our Boys, and we did all those political things. I remember all of that going on, and riots in the streets, and segregation and desegregation, and, the black and white problems in the schools. And remember, it was a mess. Preachers were preaching on end times. See, we've talked about this a little bit. There was an uptick, and the world is coming to an end. And Jesus is coming back. Jack Van Impe took a meteor rise, trajectory. How many remember Jack Van Impe? He began talking about the Lord coming back, and this is going to happen in our lifetime. And there was stuff about Israel and the 67, the War of 67, the Six-Day War in Israel, where they captured the Golan Heights. And there was just all this big push because, boy, it's over with. Suddenly, out of nowhere, comes Jerry Falwell saying there's still a lot of people that aren't wicked. Same time, there was this movement called the Jesus Freaks. Huh? Anybody heard that Rubber Duck song? This is Rubber Duck. You ever heard, you know what I'm talking about? And what is it? What's the name of that song? What is it? It's Convoy. Yeah, there it is, Convoy. And, there's this Friends of Jesus in the Chartos, microbus. Remember that in that line? It's talking about those Jesus freaks. And they were going around in sandals and peace signs and all that kind of stuff. And they were hippies, but we call them Jesus freaks. Well, that was happening. Jerry Falwell was coming in. And then suddenly we elected a president that had some good sense, Ronald Reagan. And suddenly, he switched the downturn, everything the peanut farmer had taken away from us. You guys remember that? And who, by the way, was a good man in his own right and has done some amazing things for the country through Habitat for Humanity. Total lot of respect for him as a man, but as a president, he just did not know what he was doing. And but Ronald Reagan came in and fixed a lot of that. But about the time Ronald Reagan came in, remember Monica not Monica Lewinsky, that was Clinton. What is the name of that woman? Start with a G. Geraldine Ferraro. How many remember her? She was a practicing witch running for vice president with Walter Mondale. Remember that? Boy, these names I haven't thought of in a while. The country was just, welcome to my algebra class. The country was going downhill fast, right? And so then all of a sudden, Reagan comes in, he sets up a different form of economics. They called it trickle-down economics, they called it Reaganomics, but it was based on, well, we won't get into economics, but it was based on some really good principles. And we have enjoyed for the last 30-some years following that, we enjoyed great prosperity in America. During that prosperity, we elected some, people that have been messing with it tinkering with it under the hood, trying to make it better, and have really messed up things. So now we are again in a horrible decline in our country. Count how many years it's been since 1984. Where are we at? Huh? Almost 40. Where do you get the 40? Well, in the Old Testament, you'll find out during the time of the Judges, Israel was like that. They cycled about every 40 years. About every 40 years, they'd cycle, and God would raise up a deliverer. So, I was telling our young people, I was saying to them, listen, kids, you know, Euclid developed this whole system. And I said, World War II, following World War II, there was a great revival in America. People were making things. It was almost a renaissance. And then it fell apart. And then after Reagan, 1984, there was a revival and a renaissance in America. Hello. Think about this in 1984. You realize what's been developed in the last 40 years in our country? Incredible creativity in our country. Incredible things. But it's now in decline. Everybody's wanting to talk about decline. And I told these young people, I said, listen, this is your time. You could be the ones making the next mathematical computations that blow everyone's mind. You could be developing brand new ideas that we haven't even thought of yet. This is your opportunity. We've got a chance, if we'll turn our hearts back to God, we've got a chance to make some big stuff. You guys have that chance. And I told them, take the reins of your culture. Take the reins of it. These influencers, I mean, these kids, everyone wants to yell about these influencers. You imagine, here's a kid in their bedroom, has a cell phone, turns into this media mogul that influences millions of people with the color of lipstick they wear. And a kid can do that with this. Think about the power of that in the hand of a Christian kid that understands God and knows God. Think of the power of that. So, the reason I told you all that was I believe when I'm teaching you. I believe that when thou walkest down, when thou risest down up, in every area, every class period, you must weave in, and you should. If it's a part of you, it will. Weave in this conversation about God. He should be in everything. That's how kids grow up, loving God, because that's part of your life. If your Christianity is a weekend trip to church, if your Christianity is a 30-minute Bible devotion and then now we're going to get into real life, your kids will pick up on that. They will learn that life and church and life and God are two different things. If you want your kids to be pulling the ropes, you want them to be part of everything God's got going on, then you have to immerse them in everything God's got going on. Every day. Does that make sense? And that's what Deuteronomy teaches us. Let me take you to another passage that we're gonna take this down just a little bit, another level here. I want you to see this. Isaiah 28. Verse 9. Isaiah 28, verse 9. Whom shall he teach knowledge? And whom shall he make to understand doctrine? Them that are weaned from the milk and drawn from the breasts. For precept must be upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line, here a little, there a little. I want you to understand something here. We're talking about teaching babies doctrine. Not when I'm meaning to embarrass my family or anything, but I remember when Ryan was born, I held him in my arms for the first time, and the very first words he heard from me was, "My son, if sinners entice thee, consent thou not." When I held Zachary in my arms, very first verse he heard every day, he heard, "My son, if sinners entice thee, consent thou not." They heard it all the time. You know why? It's a Bible verse. I kept telling them these verses. They were babies. I brought them to church right away. They were immersed into church culture. I know that there's a lot of fear about that with little babies. You know, people say, "Well, your baby can." I want you to understand something about babies. Babies have immunities that some of the rest of us don't have when they're first born. And I've seen parents do this. They'll say, "Well, we got to keep our baby out of circulation. We don't want everybody's germs on our baby." Well, trust me, I get that. I understand. I've stood at the bedside of too many babies that have died. I've seen that too many times when kids have gotten things. But I'm going to tell you something. I've never, ever seen a baby pick up diseases at church. Never, ever. But I've seen little babies that have come to church and become part of the church and begin to love the church people and they become part of it. Last night we had Valentine's banquet here, and I appreciate those of you that came and those of you that stayed and helped to clean it up. That was nice too. But we had our grandbaby was here, and she was Ryan was holding her, and someone from the church came in and came up and talked to her, and she immediately broke into smiles and laughter. And I was standing there thinking about how rich her life is to know all of you people and to have all of you people pour into her life. How rich that is. You know what I'm saying? And people that say, "Well, this is my baby. We're not going to bring her to," look, they learn doctrine from the womb. They learn doctrine very, very small. Now, how do I know that? Let me give you a couple illustrations. Moses. When was Moses put in Egypt? Now, you know how I feel about the public school. I think it's damning our kids. And I mean that in that word. I'm not cussing. It's damning the souls of a lot of our kids. I believe it is. When you hear what I hear, Monica could tell you we had some issues this week. When you hear some of the stuff we hear from some of these kids who come out of the public school, some of the things that they've been taught and learn and hear, it's horrible. People don't even realize what they're getting, the garbage that's being poured into their heads. But I'm going to tell you something. I have never seen a public school in our country that's as bad as the Egyptian culture Moses was put into when he was just weaned. Now, his mom was there close by to help, and that's why he grew up to be a Hebrew. But Moses was immersed in a culture that was wicked and vile. I've never seen a public school that's as bad as Nebuchadnezzar's court. But Daniel, 12 years old, was put into that environment without his parents and succeeded. I've never seen, personally, a religious home that was as vile and full of wickedness as Eli's home. But Samuel, when he was weaned, was thrust into that environment and became a great judge of Israel. My point in these three stories is simply this. The teaching about God is done early and young. If it's done early and young, it'll follow them their whole life. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, what happens? He will not depart from it. That's what the Bible says. Did I create any questions? Do you have questions or comments? Yes, ma'am. Yes, there you go, John the Baptist. She leaped in the womb. When Mary came with Jesus, John the Baptist responded from the womb. I have this series I put together some years ago on raising kids with character. Basically what I did was I went through the 2,800 some verses in the Bible about children and raising kids, and I tried to figure out a pattern and a pathway how to raise kids with character. We did this when our kids were small. To try to figure it out, because we knew we only had one shot at it. And so one of the things I found out was there's 4 different ages of development. First age of development is in the womb. What a mother does when the child is in the womb matters to the kid. It affects and shapes the character of the child. That's interesting. It's in the Bible. The second stage of development is when a child is an infant, a baby. What the mother and father do with that baby and what that baby is involved in during those first few years of infancy matters. The next stage is a child. The Bible talks about a child, and that the child age spans, it goes from several years. But it's when they're learning, their prefrontal cortex has not been yet engaged. What a child Can I just say this? I told this to a young person this week. They were talking about things they learned at the public school, and I said, look, and this young person looked at me and said, you're confusing that there's many different kinds of love. Okay. I'm sure you understand more about it than I do. I said, what do you mean? And this young person told me that what they'd heard, and I said, look, with all due respect, you're too young to understand anything about the issues of sexuality. You're not old enough. Your brain's not computing it all. It's not your fault. Your prefrontal cortex, this is science, your prefrontal cortex is not yet working. You don't understand it. Okay. And yet we're pounding this stuff in kids' heads in the public schools. We're pounding this stuff in their heads. And they don't even understand what you're talking about. They don't even know. There's no way for them to grasp it. During those childhood years, the Bible tells you specifically how to teach the kids and what to give them so that they'll grow up wholesome and healthy. And then the fourth area of development is youth. During youth is when they learn how to become an adult. It's during those times when they learn how to work with dad or how to work with mom. They learn, the Bible says it's good for a young man to bear the yoke in his youth. When he steps up to the plate and does the things that need to be done around the house. And if you leave your kids sitting in the room by themselves playing on their video games, you're ruining them. You're just destroying them. They at that time, youth is when they need to learn how to serve, work. Goliath was a soldier from his youth. David, you go through the Bible, and there are all these young people that accomplished great things did this from their youth, during their youth. So there's 4 different ages of development I found in the Bible, and Lana kind of got me going there. That starts in the womb. There's 4 different things. So Janie? Mm-hmm.
And that's so dangerous, because if there is no absolute truth, there is no God. There's
Right.
no right and wrong.
Right.
You know, to me, the gender confusion is so obviously wrong that we can teach our, but if they have a foundation of there is no absolute truth,
Right.
everything comes.
And I think that's where the early childhood training comes. That's one of the things that you teach early on, that there are absolutes. And can I say this? Watch this now. When you're correcting your children, if you say no to them and no doesn't really mean no to you, you're ruining them. If you say no, you better mean no and hold the line on no. Because why? They need to learn absolutes. It's not, you know, this week something happened, and the Queen Mother, my wife, went into a bunch of the girls and kind of dropped the hammer on them a little bit. You know, really got in their face, and then Friday morning, I had a meeting with all of them, and Ryan says, if he's here, you know it's a problem. And because I don't go in there and yell at them, but I talked to the high school, junior high and high school, and said, this is what happened. This is not going to happen anymore, right? This is not going to happen anymore. And I forgive you and love you. And the thing was, what had to happen was, we had to be it was difficult, it was hard, because you love these kids, and these kids are just kidding around. I know they're kidding around, but they need to understand that this is not appropriate. And then once they understand that, then you say, okay, I forgive you all, it's done, I love you, let's forget it, it's in the past, it never happened. Now they have hope. And you know, Friday was so wonderful. The kids behaved so well. They were just like angels all day on Friday. I was like, you know why? Because they're secure. The other day, I got on my class, and I got on because they were being lazy, and I got done. I said, I feel really bad because I've gotten mean with you guys. And one little girl, she says, I feel better. I said, why do you feel better? She says, well, because we know you love us. We know what we're doing. Yeah, that's exactly right. Huh? So here's what happens. That absolute teaching comes from, okay, so this is a line. It's all fun and games, but you cross this line, you don't cross that line. But boy, they didn't mean, I don't care whether you meant it or not, hush. This is a line you crossed. You don't cross it again. Capiche? And they get that. Kids get that. Lisa? Prefrontal cortex is working. Right. You're exactly right, Lisa. What she's saying, for those of you that are online can't hear what she's saying, she's talking about how the world is teaching our children that they have more, we're treating them like they are adults when they're not. And it's a really valid point. When I was at the school board meeting the other day, we were fighting about the sex education program that was going on into the public school. And get this now. So we're going to teach, they're debating about what kind of things they're going to teach the high schoolers about sexual education. Okay? So on their panel to determine what's going to be taught was 10th graders. So in the board meeting, in the board meeting, a 10th grader who was the leader of the group, of his think tank group, stood up and was saying, you need to move ahead in the world. You need to, and he impassioned speech, well put together, well articulated, why they needed to have this advanced level of sex education. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, young man, you go to school because you don't know things. You're not in charge of your education because you don't know what to be taught, what needs to be taught. And what, to Lisa's point, that's exactly the world we live in. They're telling the children, well, this is what you guys want. Okay, we're going to give you, we're going to help you teach yourself, because really it's all about self-learning. That reminds me of that, what is that little clip I saw on Facebook some time ago? I think it's a perverted show that comes off of, because I've never watched the show, but this guy smarted myself. And he says, I realize I'm in jail, and he self-smarted myself. And he said, I've figured out that if you put too much stuff from the books in your head, it's gonna make you dead. And I'm like, that, you know, it's stupid, it's silly, but it's illustrating the point. You can't teach yourself when you don't know what is being taught, or what needs to be taught. So we got to shut. Go ahead, Janie, real quick.
I was just going to say, I have a child that has this much knowledge and very strong opinion. This much knowledge and know that her opinion is wrong. Sometimes you have to sit down and have a conversation because she thinks she knows, but she doesn't.
Right.
That's normal for children.
It is normal. And there's nothing wrong with that attitude that I've got this. Give me the handles, I can handle it. But it takes a strong teacher, parent to say, oh, no, you're not, that's not your area yet. Yeah. So we could talk all day about this, couldn't we? But here's the thing. What I wanted you to get, summarize everything we talked about, is the Lois and Eunice method is realizing we can reach their hearts when they're young. And we should try. It's better for us to build a fence at the top of the cliff than to have an ambulance surface at the bottom. Okay? All right. God bless you.